Hey guys, what's up? So in this video we're going to continue from where we stopped. For the previous video we created serializers that help us to convert our Django model objects into JSON. Now we went ahead and created a serializer. We looked into how we could convert our Python Django objects into JSON and how we can be able to turn JSON into data that we can finally save using our serializer. So we created a model serializer and we explained that this model serializer helps us to serialize our data based on the fields that we have on our Django database model. So we're going to go ahead and customize this serializer so that you can be able to have things such as validation, and we are going to actually also look into how we can use this to create, read, update and delete our Django model objects. So we're going to go ahead and first use our views. So I'm going to go to our views.py right here, and within our views we actually have some views we created in the first videos, and these views are actually ones for listing as well as giving us the post detail. Now I'm going to begin by returning our posts using our serializer. So instead of returning this dummy data that we had in the previous video, we're actually going to return real Django model objects. So to do that, I'm going to come within our list posts view, the one that you created in the previous videos, and the first thing we shall have to do is to query for our posts. So to do that, I'm simply going to go to the top of our code, and then I'm going to begin by importing our posts. So I'll just come and say from post. It's actually from .models. We're going to go ahead and import our post model, and then I'll go to our serializers. I'll say from .serializers, we're going to go ahead and import our post serializer. Now after importing our post serializer, what I'm going to do is to go ahead and create an instance of our models that's going to allow us to actually query for our posts. So I'm just going to come right here within our view, and I'll begin by saying that our posts is going to be equal to posts. So we're going to actually query for all posts as they exist in our database. So I'll do that with post.objects.all. And after doing this, then we also need to create an instance of our serializer from which we shall use to be able to serialize our posts. So the way I'm going to do that is by creating our serializer. And this is going to be an instance of our post serializer. So this takes in an instance, and the instance is actually the data that we want to return as JSON. So I'm going to specify that this instance is going to be our posts, and then we're also going to specify, so right here we're going to provide a many attribute because we are going to actually return a query set. Now the thing is, our serializer instance does not serialize a query set, so we need to provide a way in which it can convert a query set into a list of posts that it can finally serialize into JSON. So we're going to provide an attribute called a many attribute, and this is going to be a boolean which we shall set to be true. Now that we've done this, let us go ahead and return actual posts in our response. So to do that, I'm just going to come, and in our response I'm going to remove our posts, which is a list of posts that we have here. I'm actually going to go ahead and remove it, and after removing it, I'm simply going to come, and instead of returning that post list, we're going to return the data in our serializer. So I'll access it as serializer.data. I'm going to go ahead and save. So when I save this, hoping that our server is still running, our server is running. So when you go ahead and make a query, or actually make a request to the endpoint of our posts list, this time we expect that we're going to actually see real Django objects returned to us in a form of JSON. So I'm going to head over to Insomnia right here, and within our Insomnia we are going to go to the route where we actually got all our posts. Now I'm going to send this request, and in this case we actually see that it's actually returning all our data as we specified in our, actually as we saved it in our database. Now the beauty is we can also go ahead and customize the way we return this data. So I'm just going to come right here, and what I'll do is to actually create a response. So this is going to be a dictionary that's going to help us to customize and give more information about the data as we are returning it. So here we're going to return a message, and let's say this is going to be posts, And then here we shall provide our data, and this data is actually going to be our serializer data. So I'll do that with serializer.data, and I'm just simply going to change this to our response. And once we have this, I'm going to save. So after saving, I'll simply come to Insomnia right here, and when I make this request, we still see that our posts have been returned, and now a message of posts, and we have our data. So now we have been successful in retrieving all our posts as JSON. So let's go ahead and look at how we can be able to use our serializer to create actual posts. So the way I'm going to do that is to go back to our code right here. So we do not actually have an endpoint for helping us to create our posts, but the beauty is we can just do that by adding a method of posts to our HTTP methods names. So we can actually have the same endpoint for /posts, and this can help us to create as well as to retrieve our post data objects. So I'm going to come right here, and all I have to do is to add the method of post. And after adding this method of post, I'm simply going to come, and what I'll do is to specify if our method is equal to post. So I'll do that with if request. So I'll access the method attribute, and sorry for this. So this is going to be request.method. And if request.method is going to be equal to post, then what we shall have to do is to access the data that comes within the request as JSON. So I'm going to create a data variable, and this is going to be any data that comes with the request. So we shall access that with request.data. And after doing this, then we are going to create an instance of our serializer. So we shall just come and say serializer. And in this case, our serializer is actually going to be an instance of our post serializer. But in this case, we shall not need an instance. We are going to actually need the data that we're going to use to save our post instance. So what I'll do is to come and say that our data is going to be equal to, so here we're going to have our data being equal to our request data. And once we've done this, then we need to check if this data is actually valid. So I'll come and say if serializer. So in this case, our serializer is having our request data. So what you need to check is if the serializer is valid. This is actually similar to how you do it in forms. And we are going to use this to save our data. So shall just come and say serializer.save. Now after saving, in case we've been able to actually go ahead and save our data in our database, we need to return a response. So I'll just come and say return response, and in this case we're going to return a response containing our data. So in this case we're going to have our data, but let's actually create a customized response right here. So I'm just going to come and say return, actually it's going to be a response, and this will be a dictionary containing the following things. So in this case we shall say message, and in this case we shall say that our post has been created. So we shall say post created, and then we shall have our data, and that will be the post that we've created. So we shall access it from our serializer data via serializer.data. Now that we've been able to do this, I'll just simply come in here and say that our data is going to be equal to our response. Sorry for that. So we shall have response, and then we shall specify our status code. So I'm just going to come and say that our status is going to be equal to status. So the status code we return as a result of creating a resource on our backend is going to be HTTP 201 created. I'm going to go ahead and save this. So we also need to take care of a scenario in which we have not been able to validate our data properly. That's if our serializer is not valid. So the way I'm going to do that is by simply returning. So just come and say return. In this case, I'll say return response, and in this case, we shall return the serializer error. So I'll just come and say data, and in this case, we shall have serializers. In this case, we're going to actually access the errors within the serializer, and then we shall return our status. So the status we return is going to be the one for a bad request. So this will be status dot http 400, and this will be bad request. I'm going to go ahead and save. And when I save this, so let's go ahead and actually test our endpoint. So I'm going to head over to Insomnia right here, and I'm going to create a new request. So this new request is going to be for creating, sorry for that. So I'll create a new request, and this will be for creating, let me actually say create a new post. And this is going to be a post request, so shall need to specify the request body, which is going to be in form of JSON. So I'll create this. Now I'm going to go ahead and create our URL, which is going to be localhost 8000/posts. We're going to provide some JSON data in here. So I'll provide a title, and this title is going to be intro to, let's say, JSON, and let's say we're going to have the content as, so in this case we shall have our content as this is a smooth intro to JSON. So right after doing this, we shall send this request, and right now we see that our post has been created, and this post is actually having an ID of 5. So even when you get all our posts, we see that our post has been created, which is wonderful. So let's also go ahead and implement that for returning a post by its ID. Now I'm going to go right here. We had actually implemented an endpoint for returning a post by the ID, but we aren't actually using the ID. We're using the index for that specific post because we're using a list of posts. Now what I'll do is to first change our posts index to post ID, and I'll actually do the same thing in our URL. So I'll go to our urls.py within our posts, and then I'll have to change this to the post ID. And right after doing that, I'm going to go to our views, and instead of having our post, which is by getting the post index, now I'm going to go ahead and change this to our instance of post. So I'm going to use a special method or a shortcut called getObject0404. That's going to allow us to basically query for this object with the ID, and if the object doesn't really exist, then we shall return a 404 error. So the way I'm going to do that is by going to the top of our code, and then I'll have to import our Django shortcut. So I'll do that from Django.shortcuts. We are going to import our, so in this case I'm going to import our get object or 404. So I'm going to just come right here, and I'll use the get object of 404, and then we're going to need a class, which is going to be our model class in this case. So our model class is going to be post, and then we shall need some sort of attribute on this post class, which is going to be our primary key. And if the primary key is equal to the post ID, you can also specify it to be the ID. So we're going to need our post ID, then that's actually going to be our post. Now I'm going to remove this line because now we actually have what we're going to return, or I'm actually going to remove this line for returning a 404 error, and I'll just simply come and return our data as post. But this is not, this is actually a post object that's going to be returned, so we need some way to serialize it. Now I'm going to create an instance of our serializer right here, and this is going to be post serializer. So in here we shall provide the instance. So the instance is the data that we want to return as JSON, which is our post, and I'll go ahead and change this to our serializer data, or what I'll do is to actually create a response here. So this will have our data, and in this case we shall return a message of, let's say it's going to be our post, and we shall return the data as the specific post that we have serialized with our serializer. So I'll do this with serializer.data, and after doing this, then we have to specify that our response is going, actually our data is going to be our response dictionary that we've created. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then let's go ahead and test this endpoint. So I'm going to come right here, and I'll go to the route for getting a post by the ID. Now in this case, when you try to access a post at ID of 2, let's see what is actually going to happen. So when I send this, we now see that our post of ID 2 has been returned to us. So this is actually working. Now let's go ahead and also implement endpoints for updating and deleting a post. Now the way we're going to do that is by coming right within here. So I'm going to add 2 endpoints. I'll just come and basically create a view function. So when you have the generic extension, you can do something like view, and then this will create for you a view function. So we're going to provide a view, and this is going to have the name of update post, and this will take in the request of type request, and we shall also take in the post ID. So we shall have the post ID, and this will be an integer. So we're going to decorate this with our API view decorator, and then we shall specify that the HTTP method name in this case is going to be our get, because we need to get, actually this is going to be for our put, because we need to update a post. So I'll have to pass this for now. I'm going to do the same thing for deleting as well as getting. So I'll just come and copy this code right here, and I'll copy it. So this is actually going to be the one for getting our post. So here I shall say that this is going to be for get post by ID, and this is actually going to be a get request, and then we shall have to basically implement that one for deleting our post. So I'll just come right here and specify that this is going to be for delete post, and this is actually going to have a method name of delete. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and when I save, we're going to check if our server is running. Yes, it's running. Now let's go ahead and actually implement all these endpoints. So we have one for getting a post by the ID, and actually we've already implemented that here, which is our post detail. Now I'm going to remove this. So this is actually going to be the one for updating a post. The first thing we shall have to do is to get our post. So I'll use the same query that you've used right here for getting the post. So I'll just get the post by its ID. And right after doing this, then we shall need some way of getting the data that's going to be updating our post. Now the way we're going to do that is by coming and saying that the data is going to be the data from our request. So I'll say that the data is equal to request.data, and then we're going to also create our serializer instance that we're going to use to save this data. So I'll come and say that we're going to have our serializer object being equal to an instance of our post serializer. So here we're going to have 2 things. We're going to have the instance as well as the data. Now the instance is going to be the object that we want to update, and the data is going to be the data that we want to use to update the object. Now in this case, I'll come and say that we're going to have the instance as our post, and we shall have the data, and this data is going to be equal to our request data. Now we're going to check if this is valid, and if it's valid, we're going to go ahead and save this to our database. Now come right here, and all I have to say is if serializer dot is valid, then we are going to go ahead and save this. So we shall do that with serializer dot save, and after doing this, then what I'm going to do is to return a response. Now we're going to create our response, which is going to be a dictionary. So in this case, we shall have a message, and this message is going to be our post updated. So in this case, we're going to say our post is going to be updated successfully, and then we're going to return our data, and this data is going to be serializer.data. So after doing this, then let's actually return this response. So I'll just come and return our response, and this response is going to have the data. So our data is actually going to be the response dictionary we've created up here. Then we're also going to need a status. So I'll come and say that we shall have our status being equal to status dot http 200, okay, meaning a successful response. Now in case we have the errors, then we shall have to do the same thing for when we actually have serializer errors. So I think we did that when we were creating our post right here. So I'll just copy this, and all I have to do is to paste it right here. So I'm going to actually correct my indentation here, and hoping that everything is fine. I'm going to go ahead and save this. So let's go ahead and look at how we can update our post. So I'm going to head over to Insomnia here, and then I'm going to create a new request. So this new request is going to be for updating a post. Now this will be a put request, so we're going to be having our data, and this data is going to be in form of JSON. So I'm going to create this, and the first thing I'll have to do is to provide our URL. So our URL is going to be localhost 8000. So this will be slash. So we need to create a URL for this. So I'm going to go right here, and in our URLs for our posts, I'll create another path. So this is going to be the one for updating. So I'll basically call this slash update, and then slash, that we shall have the post ID. So I'll come and say that we shall have our post ID, which is going to be an integer. And right after doing that, I'll have to attach this to our view function, which is going to be for updating a post. Now we're going to also provide this a name, and this name is going to be update post. So after doing this, I'm going to go ahead and save, and when I save, I am going to go and test this endpoint. So when I go back here, we're going to actually go to our localhost 8000 slash post slash update, and then we shall have the ID. So I'm actually going to go to post slash update slash ID, and in this case it's going to be post slash update. Now let's say we are updating a post with ID of 2, and we're going to now have some data in here. So we're going to have the data, and in this case we shall, let's say, have a title that's going to be updated. So I'll just call this updated title, and I also have the content, and here our content is going to be updated content. And when you go back here and you try to get that post with ID of 2, it has a title of DRF for dummies and this content. Now let's go ahead and try to update it. So when I send, we're going to see that it's going to be updated. So let's actually try to get it. So when I try to get it here, we actually see that our resource or our post of ID2 has actually been updated. However, in this case, we've been able to look at how we can do this, and we haven't yet implemented some custom validations, but we're going to look at that in a second. So let's try to implement that one for deleting. I'll begin by creating its URL right here. So this is going to be path, and then I'll just simply call this delete, and here we shall have our integer, which is going to be our post ID. So I'm going to come and say that the view for that is going to be the one for deleting a post, and shall provide this a name that's going to be for deleting a post. So once we have this, I'm going to go ahead, and within our views, I'll simply begin by querying for that specific post. So I'm going to use the same query that we've used here, and I'll paste it in here. So right after doing this, then what I'll have to do is to go ahead and delete this. So I'll just come and say post dot delete, and after doing that, then we need to return a response. So in this case, we're going to return a response, and this response is going to have a status. So shall provide the status, and the status we're going to actually provide in this case is the one for no content. So we're going to indicate that our post has been deleted and there is no content about that post. So I'm just going to come and say status.http 204 no content. So when I go ahead and save, and hoping everything is working, our server is actually reloading, we have no errors. So let's try to delete that post. I'm going to go to our new request, and then here I'm going to specify that we are deleting a post. So this is going to be a delete request, and let's try to delete a post. So the one that we're going to delete is the one with ID of 2. So when I go to our delete a post URL, it's going to be at localhost 8000/posts, and then here we're going to have our ID of 2. So when I send this, we actually have method delete not allowed for this URL, and let's try to actually our URL in this case is /delete. So we're going to go to posts and /delete and then /ID of 2. So when I send this, we now see that our post has been deleted and our status code of 204 no content is being returned, and nobody is actually returned for the response since this doesn't actually exist. So when you try to actually search for that, we now see that it's not found, and a detail of not found or a status code is not found is actually returned to us. So we've successfully been able to look into how we can create, read, update, and delete our post instances using our serializers. Now let's go ahead and look at how we can be able to use our serializer, which is our model serializer, to create validations for things like creating as well as updating our posts. So to do that, I'm going to go within our serializers. We created a model serializer right here, and we can be able to define how we can be able to customize this so that we add some beautiful validations, as we're going to see. So I'm going to come right here, and all I have to do is to add our validations. So the way we do that is by coming and specifying the attributes that we have for each of the fields that we define. So I'm going to begin with our title. So this title is going to be one of the fields that are editable, or the fields that we can actually write. So I'm going to customize the title as well as our content. So in this case, I'll come and say that we're going to have a field of char field, and here we can have our max length. So I'm going to come and have our max length, and this max length is going to be 50 as we defined in our model right here. So we defined our title to be a title of 50 characters. I'm going to go away from this, and we're going to also define our content, but I don't think there is that much validation needed on our content. Let's try to validate only our title. So when I save right here, I'm going to go ahead and try to validate when creating our post. So when you create a post, you're actually going to try to create a post, but this post is going to have a length that's greater than 50. So let me try to generate some lorem ipsum text. So I'm going to go right in here. I'll create a simple HTML file, and I'll just simply try to create some, sorry for this. So just going to simply create some lorem ipsum text, and within here I'll create this text to have 100 characters. And when we have this, I'm going to close this for now. And so let me try to actually create a title that's long. So I'm going to head over to our Insomnia right here. I'll provide our title, and this title is going to be as long as this. So when you try to send this, we now see that we have some validations here, and we actually see that ensure this field has no more than 50 characters. So this is actually adding some validations. Now we're going to look into how to enforce these validations at an advanced level in the coming videos. I hope you've learned from this video, and if you like this video, please go ahead and leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Thank you for watching, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye.